We're so excited that you all are here for our last webinar of 2024. So let's get started. So on behalf of the Meal TLL, welcome to our outcome harvesting webinar. We hope that you learn a lot from this. I know I'm going to, because this is something new for me. But before we get started, I'm going to go over just a few quick notes. So please introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us your name, the office that you're joining from, and your job title. Also, this webinar will be held in English with Spanish and French translation. So if you click on the little interpretation button, you can choose your preferred language. If you have any questions, please go ahead and write them in the chat box. We do have a question and answer session at the end. And yes, this webinar is being recorded. The link to the recordings will be sent out afterwards, as well as the presentation and some resources. So just very quickly, after this, then we're going to have the presentation, the Q&A session, and then a few closing remarks with some links and resources and a feedback survey. And then I just wanted to present really quickly our presenter for today. It is Benedikte Jeppesen with ADRA Denmark. She is a senior meal advisor with ADRA Denmark, and she's also a very active member of the Meal TLL. She has been a meal practitioner for 15 years and has experience with outcome harvesting method with Action Aid, Danish Red Cross, and ADRA Denmark. And we are so excited and happy that she's with us. So without further ado, Benedikte, the floor is yours. I'm going to stop sharing, and then you can share your screen.
Thank you very much, Carrie. So allow me just to stay quiet for a brief minute to see if I can share my screen. Here we go. Let me see. It looks different now. Does it show correctly? Almost.
If you can put it in presenter mode.
There we go.
Yep, there we go.
Great. So hello, everyone, and thank you for joining. I've been looking forward to sharing a bit about outcome harvesting, which is a method that I'm very keen on. I learned about it in 2017, I think, and have been a fan ever since, really. So I hope that you will appreciate also what it is that it brings to the table. So from as meal persons, we'll know that hundreds and thousands of methods exist, and they are all developing and changing into new methods according to needs. So one of, sorry, I just wanted to see if I could put this there. So outcome housing was developed by this guy, Ricardo Wilson Grau, together with some other colleagues throughout the 2010s and 20s. He was inspired by the tool called outcome mapping, which is more of a planning tool, and also utilization-focused evaluation. And I know he also worked together with Michael Kuhn-Patton on developing and refining this methodology. From the metro map of evaluation tools, you may see that it comes in this line, this dotted line, together with most significant change, which is another very participatory approach, theory of change approach that everyone knows these days. And it all came out initially from this branch about having the logical thinking that we have input, output, outcomes, and long-term objectives. But so many different methods have morphed out of through these branches. This is just a drawing that Sebastian Lemire did a few years ago to get an overview of all the forest of different methods. So, but outcome harvesting is it is a participatory evaluation approach, but also utilization focused. So the idea for it is well, I guess for any evaluation, but this is very focused on we only have to evaluate and find out of things that we can use and someone is going to use, and in a very participatory manner and very useful for learning. So learning, I would say, is the key word actually when we do outcome harvesting. So why outcome harvesting? Why the focus on outcomes? Do they matter at all? I like this drawing. I think it's very telling. It says, the doctor says to the other one, brilliant surgery, well done. Shame the patient died. So this, in a nutshell, tells that we can be really good at what we're doing, but if what comes out of what we're doing is not good, then we should rather not be doing what we do. And outcomes are often untangible, difficult to measure, difficult to foresee. When we do our planning, our log frame, we always know what we want to do, the activities, we know what we're good at. We also know that we want resilient communities, or we want peace in the world, or we want da-da-da-da. It's big visions. But how to get there and how do we know we're on track and what's to be measured in the middle? These guys are saying, I think you should be more specific here in step 2, where it just says, then a miracle occurs. And sometimes our log frames look like that. So I'm not saying that we should not do log frames and that we should not monitor in different ways, as this one is allegedly Einstein who told, but who knows? Not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. So this is a very illustrative quote to say that there's so much more happening than what we can easily measure. Some things can be counted, and we should if it's useful to count them. We have to do that also as meal persons and when we do monitoring. But for complicated and complex aspects, we may consider using methods that help us also consider what is unexpected, or if something additional to what we expected happened. And for this particularly, outcome harvesting is well suited. Outcome harvesting can create a rich picture of the kinds of change that we or the project is contributing to, and a rough picture of the extent of these changes. And with this, I want to say that we create very detailed and illustrative pictures with outcome harvesting of the changes that we contribute to, but we cannot tell with outcome harvesting the whole picture of everything that we do. So did we achieve everything we set out to in the project? That's not the intention of outcome harvesting to answer that. But it gives us information about if we are on track or if we are actually seeing the changes that we envisioned. So in one sentence, you may say outcome harvesting is an evaluation or monitoring method that collects evidence of what has changed and then works backwards to determine whether and how the program or the project contributed to that change. So it's working backwards instead of what we do when we plan. Then we think towards the future. Here we work backwards. As you say, could say any evaluation tool does. I'll get back to how it differs from traditional evaluation methods. So there are some key points of the methodology that we should always consider. Outcome harvesting is structured in this way. You start with doing a design. You design the evaluation questions. What do we want to find out about? And how do we want to do it? Then we may draft outcomes based on what we already know. Often that would be from documentation such as reports. Oftentimes we'll have, say, a 4-year program with quarterly or annual reports that we could look into and see if we find outcomes in those. Then the most participatory part of the process occurs. That's when we harvest outcomes with staff and eventually other stakeholders. Here we would gather people who know about the project in a room for ideally a couple of days or more, and just empty their brains, find out everything they know about the project and changes they have seen occur. Note them down in this very structured way that I will come back to. After that, we may include this step about substantiation. That is both if we need further information from someone on the outcomes, and if we want to check with external or third parties that can sign up to what we are claiming, saying this outcome really happened. It happened also with the contribution of you, and we also find it significant. So often we will do that if we use outcome harvesting for an external evaluation. When you do it for internal monitoring, we would rather skip this step because it's also quite time consuming. Then we do analysis and interpretation, which of course leads to learning and gives us the opportunity to adapt our programs. Say, okay, we see that this and this is working well, and maybe this has gotten less attention. So what do we want to do about that? And then lastly, support the use of findings, adapting our programming, as I said. But make sure that the findings or the learnings that we get out of the process are actually being used. Some key concepts in outcome harvesting, or some principle, you may say. I have a few slides for each of these. We use a special definition of outcome in outcome harvesting. I want to touch on the sphere of control, influence, concern, which is very key to understanding outcome harvesting. Starting with what has changed, it's another key point, and contribution over attribution, and participation. I have a few more words about each of these. So in outcome harvesting, we define an outcome as a behavioral change in a social actor that we have contributed to. So a social actor is anyone who acts in society. It could be individuals, it could be a group or a community, it could be an institution, an organization, and all of these act in society. What we want to look into in outcome harvesting is seeing if there are any behavioral changes. So are they behaving in a new way through their actions, activities, have new relationships been built, new policies, maybe there's a change in practice, before only conventional agriculture, now it's climate smart agriculture. That's a practice that could have changed. The point is that is something that what we're looking for is a new behavior. Otherwise, it would be just more of the same. The sphere of control, influence, and concern are very important to keep in mind. We know that outputs are within our sphere of control. We know they're going to happen because we pay for them, we implement them. We implement the activities and then come the output. So if we do a lot of trainings, we will have a lot of people trained as an output. The outcomes are beyond our sphere of control. They are in our sphere of influence. So we can influence people or actors, institutions, to behave in a new way. If they have been through our training, one thing is that they've been trained, but are they actually doing things differently afterwards because of that training? If they are, that would be the outcome. Well, if they are not, then no outcome came out of it. And lastly, we have the sphere of concern, which is very far from our sphere of control. So we want to influence actors to help create the impacts in the end. So outputs are easy to measure. We can see if they happened or not. The outcomes are more difficult and more, sometimes at least, more intangible. Impact is where we are going through to, and outcomes can be placed in very different parts of this zone. Some are even also tapping into our sphere of concern. That's okay. We can harvest outcomes at any level. Only if they are within our sphere of control, they are not considered outcomes. Then they are outputs. So when we look for outcomes, we start with what has changed. We start from the back, as I said, a reverse logic. We look for outcomes which can be, they can be planned outcomes, something that we planned, or they can be something that we didn't plan for, but happened anyway as a consequence of our activity. So we go from effects and look for the cause afterwards. Sometimes we may even find outcomes that we planned for to happen, but we can see that in reality, we didn't contribute to them. So in that case, we cannot say that it's our outcome, even if it's an outcome that we planned for. If we didn't do anything to contribute to that outcome to happen, then we cannot claim it as ours. So to put it in a different way, when we plan, we see things very logically. It's very organized. We start here, we give this input, do these activities, then this output happened, then this outcome will happen. Lastly, we'll get this impact, and that will be in line with our vision. That's how we plan. And I think that's the only way it's okay that we plan like that, because we cannot take into account every single challenge or change in context that may occur during a program. We have to start somewhere. So we have a plan, and then in the end, it looks like this. So that is completely normal when we work with social change. We cannot predict everything. So we can, with the outcome harvesting lens, we can go and look for outcomes everywhere around our project intervention. And hopefully we will then see that things are coming out of our activities in the end. So after we have experienced the change, we could be very concrete and specific about each change as opposed to before. We look for observed outcomes and not the desired outcomes. The desired outcomes, we have to make them when we plan, but then they might not be the same as the ones we observe after some time. A fourth concept, which is also key, is that we contribute to changes. We can never claim that it's a change in a social actor has happened only because of our intervention. So that's why we say contribution over attribution. That's absolutely fine. We often know that we have contributed maybe a small part to something, some change to happen. That doesn't mean that the change is less significant. It just means that we are one actor among others. So our program will influence the social actor in one way. The social actor is being influenced by many other actors, context, and so forth. So it gives us, if we do the analysis, a it gives us also interesting information to see who else or what else has contributed to this change. If it's someone or something that we hadn't expected or didn't see coming, we may consider including these aspects in our future programming, and maybe even including a new partner. So participation is key to outcome harvesting. It's a very participatory approach. Partners and staff are involved in the harvesting of outcomes. They do the analysis, and hence they will often have a high ownership to the conclusion, maybe as opposed to when you hire a consultant. They do the job, they deliver the report, and then you are on to new things on your to-do list. So here we're actually participating all the way through. So the bus picture here is really just to show the messiness, because it is messy when you start looking for outcomes all over the place, but it's also very, very enriching. And it's great to be harvesting outcomes in groups, because you may have had different visions of something, a different perspective, that then gives us a richer picture in the end. Okay, so when we talk about outcomes in outcome harvesting, the core of the matter is the outcome statements. This is where we describe the outcomes. The outcome statement consists of 3 parts always. First, the outcome description that describes very specifically the who changed, what happened, when and where, the significance, why the outcome is important, and the contribution, how did the program or project contribute to this change. The outcome descriptions, who changed, again, it could be a group, it could be an individual. Often it would be groups or organizations or institutions. So we don't want to do these personal case stories where we interview a person and say, before this and this, and then I met this organization and now everything is nice. It's not that kind of stories. So we look for behavioral changes, and for them to be more significant, we will often look for changes in groups or communities, organizations, or institutions. But of course, any individual is also a social actor. What did they do differently? How can we see that they have changed their behavior, their practice, or was it a policy change or a new relationship that happened? So what did they do differently? When did it happen and where? And here we want to be as specific as possible, because it will help us be very concise when we draft the outcome statement. In case there's a change in relationship, then it could be useful to include also with whom, but that is not part of the core of the outcome descriptions. Here are a few examples of outcome descriptions. This is from an evaluation that we are actually currently doing with the ADRA Ethiopia. We had the outcome harvesting workshop 2 weeks ago in Gode. So here are 3 examples of outcome descriptions. In 2022, in ADRA, community animal health workers signed MOU with private veterinary pharmacies to ensure improved access to reliable and affordable drug supply. And in 2022, ADRA Agricultural and Natural Resource Development Office purchased 4,200 seedlings of moringa and neem tree from the FFS group, that's a Farmer Field School group in Kayane, to promote the Green Legacy Initiative of the government. And in 2022, Gigino Kebele Council chose 2 women to be leaders of the Kebele administration. They were chosen to be chairwomen and deputy chairwoman. So these, I hope you can see that these are like concrete pictures that you can see in your head. These are events that have happened. That's the social actor did something, something that changed the situation. But if we want to know why this is important, because you may say, why it is important that 2 women have been chosen as leaders. In other contexts, this may occur every day. So we need to know as well why these changes are important. This is where the significant part comes in. The significance describes the value of the outcome and help the reader understand the context. So it could be, for instance, that this behavior is the first time that it happened. The case with the women being elected as leaders is actually the first time in that community that women have been elected for these posts. So in that sense, you can see it's really a highly significant outcome. It also occurred in a very patriarchal culture. So it's a very important, that's the significance can then explain this, that this is why it's so important, the outcome. Another kind of significance could be also that it has potential to grow into something even greater. It could be that it's an unexpected outcome, something that is surprises. It could be that it's some very difficult change that happened. Maybe it's a trigger to for other observed outcomes. Maybe you can see that it's if when we look backwards, we can see that this outcome actually builds on several other outcomes. Maybe we may find. Or it could be a negative outcome. This word negative is another word we like a lot, but sometimes it's useful to see also from a do no harm perspective, are our intervention actually contributing to negative outcomes as well? I mean, could we cause that the situation gets worse because of our intervention? So those kind of things are also useful to look out for. When we have defined the significance, we also need to define the contribution of the program or the project. What have we done that has contributed to this change? If nothing, as I said before, then it's not our outcome. It may be a nice change, but if we didn't contribute to it, then we cannot claim it as our outcome. When we think about contribution, here it says plausible contribution. We may want to think broadly, not only looking into our plans and see which activities did we do. It can be so many other things that we have done that have actually contributed to this outcome. Here are some examples. I will not read them out loud, all of them. But maybe a thing like we've employed a female field worker that might have had a major impact for some of the women in a community. Maybe we have written a report about some specific needs in a certain context and submitted them to the right duty bearer at the right moment. Or maybe we have met at a conference with someone, a decision maker that we have influenced in a way. It can be so many different things that that's the advice, is to be generous when we think about our contribution. So as long as we can really say we did do something, then we can claim that it's our outcome. So I have a few examples of outcome statements. This one is from the Danish Red Cross, an evaluation I did a few years back. Well, actually last year. So this is from Niger. In November 22, religious leaders in Mamouja, Niger, started promoting the use of birth control measures on radio in the local language. So you can clearly see when it happened, who changed, and where did it happen, and what happened. What's the behavior change? Why was this significant? Well, in the past, religious leaders had preached that birth control is against the religion. Religious leaders play an important role in establishing and maintaining norms and cultural values within their societies. and they can encourage and influence certain behavior change in women and men in the community. And plausible contribution. The project staff organized sensitization sessions with community leaders and members on the right of women and girls to have decision-making power over their sexual and reproductive health, including the use of modern contraception methods. The broadcast was hosted by Niger Red Cross. So you can see there's a clear contribution. But still, it is an outcome because the religious leaders themselves started promoting the use of birth control measures. No one could force them to do that. So they did that. And that makes them the social actor here, the religious leaders, that makes them change. It's a sign that they change behavior, that they have started promoting this through radio broadcast. So that's an example for Red Cross, and an example from ADRA South Sudan. In 2020, my Wood community leaders, religious leaders, and now I get issue with this one. So religious leaders and youth group leaders signed an agreement to support peaceful coexistence in my Wood County. Significance. In the agreement, the two communities stated that they would not be involved in military confrontation. They also committed to respect the cessation of hostilities signed in November 2019 between the government and opposition, whose leadership are both based in Juba. As a result of the agreement, no cases of violence were witnessed in the last months of 2020. So very clear significance. You have no doubt that this was an important outcome. The contribution, 6 religious leaders groups and 6 youth groups were supported by the project. The groups were trained in peace building and reconciliation and how to map out drivers of conflict and mitigate conflicts. So again, a clear contribution from the project. I have a few more examples. I think I'll skip to read them out loud because I'm also mindful of the time. But I hope you can see the structure is the same, and having such a tight structure helps us to be specific when we harvest the outcomes, and that is really helpful. I think also that we speak everyday everyday language when we do when we write the outcomes. No need for long program lingo words. So I just here at the end, I want to show some examples of how we can use these what kinds of analysis you can do with these outcomes. As you can have seen from the examples, they're very qualitative. It's very descriptive information, but you can also, because they're so structurally written, you can tag them with different tags that then can help you afterwards to do some analysis. For instance, if you tag by social actor, this is from an example from the Red Cross evaluation I did. You can see we have here spelled out the different actors in society, the different social actors that we are working with and that we hope to see changes in. And you can see that the largest amount of outcomes have happened at community level, some also at individual level, some at community leader level, and very few in schools and education. And the most have happened in Red Cross, Red Crescent, National Society organizations. So we have tagged here by social actor. We have also tagged by breakthrough. This is what the Danish Red Cross calls their strategic objectives. So they have one on healthy lives, one on disaster damage fewer lives, and one on included and safe people. Each of the outcomes can be tagged within one of these areas. So if it's an outcome that has to do with health, we would tag them with that. And then you can arrange and organize the outcomes afterwards so that they give you a picture. Like this, which is not for you to read because it's too small. But here we have organized the outcomes according to thematic area, social actor, and country. We did this evaluation across 6 different countries, including global advisors in Denmark. And as you can see, we've used color coding here. So all the blue ones are from Kenya, all the orange ones are from Myanmar, all the purple ones are from Palestine. Then they are organized according to social actor, the community ones, the government ones, the Red Cross, Red Crescent Society ones, and the global ones here. And then we have also tagged them on thematic areas. So this is the health area, where we have mental health and psychosocial support outcomes are here. The non-communicable disease related outcomes are here, and health and emergency outcomes are here. So it gives you pictures, I hope also you can see. For instance, we can see we had no global level outcomes in health and emergency. So we may ask, is that because we don't work on health and emergency at a global level, a policy level, or how come? If we zoom in a bit, we may also see the findings that we see can be this, that some communities are starting to organize and engage. Government, this one was actually, we had engagement from education providers. That's something that we didn't expect because education wasn't a strategic intervention area for Red Cross at that point. So, but even so these were unexpected, and these can help us think, okay, maybe it's a good idea to consider going forward to include these education providers as well in our programming. Yeah, so this gives you some idea. This is from a previous evaluation from ADRA Denmark, where we did a tax justice evaluation. So this is just to show a different way of showing the results. You can see these are the countries that we worked with at that point. And the color coding says how many outcomes are in each place. So the most green one is where there were most outcomes in Zambia. So yeah, it's a different visualization. Again, here we were from the same tax justice evaluation. We were interested in knowing which level within the countries did these outcomes occur in. So we can see far the majority of the outcomes happened at national level because it was such a policy-heavy program on tax justice and tax legislation. It makes sense that most of the outcomes happened at national level. We had 13% at local level. But we also wanted to have a global level included, and that wasn't as represented as we had hoped for. So that gave us some learning also to consider. So I think this maybe is one of the, second to last one. This is a bit more complex, but a different way of showing some outcomes. This is from a monitoring process that we did also in ADRA Denmark, who had these global platforms across the world for young people to gather and do activist work. There was a global platform in Bangladesh, one in El Salvador, one in Kenya, and several other places, but this is from these 3 platforms. You can see, well, the yellow outcomes here are from Kenya, the green ones are from El Salvador, the blue ones are from Bangladesh. And they have been mapped here on this axis so that those in this area are more from the more informal space, and here from the more formal space. Those in the top are very individual, and the ones in the bottom are more systemic. So you can see changes in this area would be if we have managed to contribute to changes in laws and policies, which some of them actually did manage to do. Here it's at individual level, it's more about resources, access to health and jobs and education. And here in the systemic Did we manage to see changes in social norms? Well, yes, actually a few. And here it's more at individual level, it's more about capacities, consciousness. So this is gives us also a picture about how where we see changes in society. Also very interesting, I think. The last one, I don't want to read it out loud, but this is to show the exercise we ended up with in Ethiopia a few weeks back. We looked at the program that we're currently implementing through the Danida funds, building opportunities for livelihood and development and enhance resilience in Somali region in Ethiopia. What we did was putting this on the floor, taking all the outcomes we'd harvested, and then put them where we thought they would belong. In which objective would they belong? So we found that most of the outcomes that we had harvested would fit in here in the diversification of income sources. And very few would fit here, where it says that social group coexist without violence. So that gives us also some insight. Well, it can mean two things. One, that we are most focused on the income generating and income diversification outcomes, which I think might be true. It's some of the it's a key competence of both ADRA and their partner VSF Swiss in that area. So it makes sense. Whereas the coexistence without violence is rather a new focus that has been included. So it makes sense that we may not have as much attention there. So it may either mean that we are not seeing any changes within that area, or that we are slightly not putting enough attention to it. So it might mean that if we have another day to harvest outcomes, we may find outcomes if we look for them. So, but you can see it gives us some way, some lens to see the status of our program. It doesn't tell the whole picture, as I said, but it gives you clues and blocks for learning. So quite an interesting exercise. Yeah, well, this is where I end. I hope that I have been able to give you an idea about the method, some examples of outcome statements, and some examples of what kinds of analysis you can do with outcome harvesting. So, Carrie, I think I used my time a bit more even. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Benedikte. This is very, very fascinating. I know for me, because it's quite new. And I think I'm still trying to wrap my head around everything. So I've just dropped a couple of links into the chat for everyone. These are some of the resources that Benedikte wanted to share with everyone. And we will be sending out a recording of this presentation, as well as the PowerPoint slides and the links to the resources, things like that. But before we end, there were a few questions that some people asked before the webinar even started. So I wanted to see if we could touch on that really quickly. And so the first one was, is the outcome harvesting method related to value-based approach?
Yeah, and to be honest, I'm not exactly sure about what value-based approach is.
Mm-hmm.
There's, as I started out saying with the metro map, there's so many words and different methods. So I haven't come across that wording in relation to outcome housing. The most common things to compare it with is this utilization-focused evaluations and outcome mapping. Also, most significance change to some extent.
Right.
So, yeah.
Great. Thank you. And then the second question, this is a really interesting one because I also want to take a step back from it. But the question was, how can we best implement outcome harvesting in school feeding projects? And I think a lot of people here, I think we're wondering, how can we best implement this method in any project? What is the first step to trying to implement the outcome harvesting method?
Yeah. So of course, when you start with designing an evaluation, you would always start with seeing what is that we want to evaluate and the evaluation questions. So, and outcome housing is not the answer to everything. And some kinds of evaluation would say that's not the relevant method. Actually, one of the things that outcome housing is really good at being used for is advocacy, because we look at these social actor and changes in behavior. So, but whenever a social actor is involved in a project or a program, which they always are in some way, you can use outcome housing. And I think for these school feeding programs, what you would look at is not the nutrition level of the kids or if they have learned more. It would be, has there been any change in attitude maybe from the teachers? Or you would make a mapping of who are the social actors involved around this school feeding program. So you would have, of course, maybe parents could be interesting to look into. Are they doing different choices now or prioritizing differently? The teachers, as I said, are they speaking about nutrition in a different way now that they know that it's not an issue, that kids don't have access to food in the school? Even the school principals, or if you take it to a higher level, have any of the things that we do with the school feeding programs influenced how policies are developing in that specific country? Do we have access maybe to the Ministry of Education or even health? Are any policies being changed because of what we can show that we have done? Or so you would broaden up the picture and look for the social actors in the program and close to the program and see, do we see any changes there?
That's
So
great. Yeah, thank you so much for answering that. Just and another question about, deciding to use the outcome harvesting method. Is this something that you need to decide at the beginning of a project, like when you're planning or designing it? Is it something that you would decide in the middle, or when you're nearing the end of a project? When do you make that decision?
Mm. So, I mean, the good thing about alcohol harvesting is that it's so flexible. So you can decide at last minute, now we want to do an outcome harvesting, because you don't depend on program plans to harvest outcomes. You can take the program and put it aside and say, now we want to harvest in this area, and we want to harvest within this thematic aspect. Um, and then see what comes out of it. And then afterwards, you can see how does it fit with my program. But I mean, we have in several Danish NGOs increasingly been using outcome housing as a monitoring tool as well, so that you along the years harvest outcomes as they come up. So if you do the training in the initial phases of a program, then you may also abilitate staff to watch out for these kinds of outcomes and note them whenever they see them happening. And then you can do a different kind of analysis, because you can start linking different outcomes together also in time. See, okay, so because that outcome happened in 19, now we can see this outcome. That wouldn't have occurred if it hadn't been for that. So you can see also how things are related. So there, I mean, you can introduce it at any time, point in time, really. It gives you different opportunities, whether you do it from the outset or the end.
That's great to know. Thank you. Um, so we have another question from ADRA Ethiopia, and they want to know, what is the difference between a case story and outcome harvesting?
Yeah, so what we have usually used, I mean, case stories. Okay, so there are different kinds of case stories. I think traditionally we have worked a lot with case stories where we put a person in focus, and we say we follow maybe steps of this person's lives. You see where did this person come from? Now after the program, what has happened? So the emphasis is on the person, It's very relatable. Everyone also for fundraising, you can see, okay, this person could be me. So it has its advantages. You can also do a different kind of case studies based on outcome harvesting. So if you have one of some of the outcomes that are presented here could easily be expanded and made into a case study where it's a change in society that is in focus rather than a person. But you can also keep the outcomes, the statements as brief as I also showed. So you have them really in a half a page. Yeah. So it's not the same, but you can do case studies based on outcome harvesting as well.
Great, thank you so much. And we just have a clarification from Emmanuel. Value harvesting is not outcome harvesting. Value harvesting concerns a community cherished values. Thank you, Emmanuel, for putting that in the
Yeah,
chat.
thanks.
So I have another question because we still have a few more minutes. So once you have decided that you're going to do outcome harvesting, how do you decide what questions to ask these social actors? Is it like a structured survey that we're normally like used to? Is it just some guiding questions? How does that work?
So we don't, in the process, we don't interact directly with the social actors. It would be like in the case now of our workshop in Ethiopia, we would gather all the project staff, and then we would start doing a mapping of the social actors that we've worked with, and then we would try to see, have we seen changes in any of these? And they would start recalling. We even did a timeline of the last 5 years to see what are the key points, key things that have happened throughout those 5 years, changes in context, or did we introduce a new approach in X year? And so we start to narrow in on what have we been doing throughout this program, and then we'll start to define. Okay, I remember this school was built. Yeah, well, but who built it and through with which approach, and who was decisive in building this school? So it turns out that the community, because of the intervention, they had organized themselves in such a way that they could prioritize now that they needed a school in that community. So they would start to gather resources among themselves, and then when they had the final plan of implementing the project of building a school, they would approach then ADRA and ask for a cost sharing, or they could approach also public duty bearers and ask for co-financing or support. So they would then be the ones in charge of having this school built, uh, putting in their own resources and organize because they had been organized properly. So they would have the school built with support then from ADRA, and afterwards they would approach local government and ask for them to provide teachers and provide school material. So you can see lots of things came out, and what the project did was basically to organize the people in the first place. So those are things that what we remember is that the school is there, but if you start asking the questions, then you get this whole story. So the school building in itself is not the key point. The key point is all the changes that happens around it, and that the community was engaged and the local government was engaged and so forth. So and then really asking open questions all the time. So and remembering and being this specific when you say, okay, when and where did it happen? Can you visualize it? And so that helps to be as specific as needed. Someone wants to speak?
Thank you for that. Yeah, I think for me, it's really like reframing how we think about evaluation methods or monitoring methods, because it's very different, a different way of thinking, I should say, and it's very, very fascinating to hear you talk about, how you conducted this. I think we could spend a lot more time talking about
Yeah,
how you're
exactly.
doing this. But our time is running short, so I wanted to copy these links. So before we go, I just wanted to put this link in there. So there is a feedback survey for everyone. If you guys could take that, it'll take only about 5 to 10 minutes. And then if you have not joined HumHub, the Meal Community of Practice, go ahead and head over there to sign up or to join the conversation or leave some resources. The Meal blog is new for us, and Jose has already written the blog for this year, so go check that out. And if you haven't signed up to our newsletter, please do so and let everyone else in your office know about it as well. As I said before, we are going to send out the recording and the PowerPoint slides. And yeah, I just wanted to, on behalf of the Meal TLL, thank you so much, Benedikte, for presenting on this really, really interesting and fascinating methodology that I think is pretty new to a lot of us. And I want to thank everyone that came here and supported. I hope you guys all learned something new. And I hope you have a really great rest of your year, and we'll see you in the next webinar in 2025. Thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah, thank you for joining. It's a pleasure.